All right, picture a blank whiteboard in your mind for a second. If I were to draw two simple stick figures up there, and then draw a straight line between them to represent mutual attraction, you'd probably think the natural next step is that they just walk toward each other, right? I mean, it seems like basic math. But in human psychology, that straight line almost never actually exists. Instead, intense attraction often triggers a complete and total shutdown. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're decoding a massive behavioral contradiction, exploring the hidden psychological reasons why a guy might just pull away or freeze up when he's around the person he's most attracted to. We're going to look at some wildly fascinating intersections between romantic psychology and high-stakes risk management to explain exactly why this happens.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because this question hits on one of the most notoriously frustrating psychological mysteries out there. You know the feeling, you can feel the chemistry, the signs are all literally right there, and yet his behavior just doesn't match the energy. It feels totally illogical. Why on earth would someone actively ignore the exact person they secretly want? Well, to answer this, we have to stop looking at romantic attraction as just a warm, fuzzy feeling and start looking at it through the lens of cognitive processing and perceived danger. Which brings us to Section 1, the attraction paradox. Before we can solve the mystery, we've got to lay out the foundation of why these seemingly obvious signals get so incredibly crossed in the first place. On one side, look at the external actions: silence, distance, pulling away. If you drew this around our stick figure, it would just look like a cold, rigid, empty box of disinterest. But then, look at the internal state. Inside that box, it is a chaotic, intense scribble of attraction, overthinking, and deep emotional investment. The wild paradox here is that the greater that internal chaos and investment becomes, the more rigidly the external box shuts down to contain it. What you're seeing on the outside is completely inversely proportional to what's happening on the inside. So, if you have ever found yourself completely confused by this dynamic, let me just validate you right now. Your brain isn't wrong. You aren't misreading the signs. When you sense someone is highly interested, but their actions are screaming indifference, your intuition is actually picking up on a profound psychological anomaly. It's a glitch in their behavioral output, not some flaw in your perception. Moving right along to Section 2, the hidden mechanics of risk. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is that to truly understand this glitch, we actually have to borrow from high-stakes trading psychology and apply it to romantic vulnerability. Enter the survival override protocol. In the financial world, when a trader is exposed to massive risk, their nervous system can just completely take over, forcing them to freeze or impulsively cut their losses to escape the sheer stress of it. Well, it turns out human biology doesn't really differentiate between a massive financial threat and a massive emotional threat. When a man feels intense, overwhelming attraction, his brain can register that vulnerability as a highly dangerous trade. Boom, the nervous system steps in and triggers that exact same survival override. And this perfectly illustrates the cross-pollination of these two worlds. Think about what we can call fear math. Compare the high financial risk of losing all your capital to the high emotional risk of losing your ego and exposing your deepest vulnerabilities. Investing your heart triggers the exact same neurological defense mechanisms as betting your entire life savings. If the perceived emotional risk, the fear of rejection, losing control, not being good enough, if that outweighs the perceived safety, the brain does the math and simply decides that the investment is way too dangerous to pursue. So what's the result? The mind just freezes. It acts as the ultimate form of ego insurance. Think back to our stick figure on the whiteboard. When he feels overwhelmed by the risk of moving forward, the brain effectively draws this thick, impenetrable, protective wall right around him to prevent any perceived damage. This freeze response, it isn't about ignoring the woman at all. It's about aggressively defending the ego from the potential devastation of a loss. Which leads us directly into Section 3. Subconscious self-sabotage. We know this internal freeze is happening to protect the ego, but how does that translate into real-world self-destructive behavior? It creates what's known as the execution gap. You can have the perfect strategy. A guy might know exactly what he wants to say, he knows he wants to text back, he knows he wants to set up a date, but right at the critical moment of action, there's a massive disconnect. The execution gap is that agonizing space where the intention to connect is completely hijacked by the sudden urge to retreat. He falters at the very last second because that survival override slams on the brakes just before the action can happen. Let's move through this and see how it builds, literally step by step, into total self-sabotage. Step 1. It always starts with intense attraction. The connection is absolutely real. Step 2. Because the attraction is so intense, it triggers overthinking and a massive anxiety spike in our stick figure's brain. The fear math kicks in. Step 3. This anxiety triggers the execution gap. The mind freezes up to protect the ego. And finally, step 4, self-sabotage. Completely unable to bridge that gap, the man pulls away entirely, accidentally ruining the exact connection he desperately wanted. It's an automatic, tragic sequence.
And this perfectly encapsulates the phrase, why some men fall hard but never commit. When you see a guy repeatedly engage in this cycle of pulling away, it's absolutely vital to reframe it. This non-committal behavior is a twisted, subconscious form of psychological protection. It's a reflection of his inability to manage his own emotional risk and cross that execution gap. It is absolutely not a reflection of your worth or desirability. Let's hit section 4, signs of hidden investment. So the crucial point is, let's bring this theory back to reality. If the external box looks like total disinterest, how do you actually spot the cracks in this psychological armor? You have to know what to look for when words fail. Notice the silent signs. Are they nervous or fidgeting? Are they remembering tiny, random details from a conversation you had 3 weeks ago? What about subtle physical mirroring of your posture? Or even just maintaining a lingering presence? They're always somehow in your orbit, but they never actually take direct action. These are the signs of that chaotic, intense internal investment leaking out. The desire is fully there. It's just trapped behind that execution gap we just talked about.
But here is a truly fascinating twist. This whole paradox, it's incredibly common among highly analytical people. High intelligence and an overactive mind actually lead to way higher relationship anxiety. Why? Because a genius-level mind is exceptionally good at running risk scenarios. They don't just see a simple straight line between two stick figures. No, they draw a massively complex, multi-layered maze inside their own heads. They anticipate every possible negative outcome, which ultimately just triggers that survival override so much faster.
Finally, section 5, breaking the cycle.
Understanding these mechanics is great, but how do we actually overcome these subconscious barriers? Breaking this cycle requires incredibly active awareness. Step 1 is simply recognizing the survival override for exactly what it is. It is not a loss of interest, it's a fear response. Step 2 is learning to close that execution gap, which means forcing yourself to take small, terrifying actions despite the anxiety. And step 3 is consciously deciding to stop self-sabotaging the connection by retreating. It literally requires dismantling that ego insurance around our stick figure and accepting that vulnerability is the only real currency that buys genuine connection. So I want to leave you with a provocative question to really chew on. Think about your own patterns, or maybe the patterns of someone you've been dealing with. What is your psychological archetype? And how is it secretly sabotaging your investments in love? If you were to sit down and analyze your past relationship choices the exact same way a high-stakes trader analyzes their worst financial losses, what hidden fear math would you uncover? Because when you start decoding your own mind like that, that is when the real breakthroughs happen.